Hello YouTube, Sidekick here. We're not flying today in our trusty A-4E Skyhawk. Instead, this is another tips and tricks video. I'm going to go through missions 4, 5, and 6. That's Iron Hand, Alpha Strike, and the Snake Eyes at Sunset. And go back and take a little look at how we set the aircraft up, how we employ the weapons and the systems, and a little bit about how the missions were planned. So if that's your thing, listen on. If you're looking for another flying video, then this may not be one you want to watch. So let's start with mission 4, the Iron Hand mission. The very first system that we use in this mission is actually the Nav Computer. To set it up, there are basically 3 steps. First of all, you have to set a waypoint in the mission editor. It has to be the first waypoint, meaning the waypoint after where the aircraft starts, so waypoint 1 in the mission editor. Then in the cockpit, you have to set the rotary switch to D1, and then you have to set the switch on the HSI to Nav Computer. Once you have done that, the HSI now shows you the direction and the distance to waypoint 1. Notice that the distance is displayed in 2 digits, one above the other. The top digit is tens, and the bottom digit is ones of nautical miles. So having done that, it's a pretty rudimentary system, especially compared to what we're used to in modern jets. So how can you use it? Well, in this mission, we use it as a waypoint to know essentially when to turn onto a pre-planned ingress vector. Because we're flying low over the ocean, we don't have any landmarks, so we don't know when to turn, so that it'll bring us over the target. So we use the waypoint essentially as a turning point. And once we know where to turn, and the vector to turn on to, we know that we will eventually make landfall where we need to so that we know where we are with respect to the target. It's a pretty simple system, and in this mission it worked. The next system we can learn how to use in this mission is the radar. Now, turning it on is as simple as turning the rotary switch to search, although we could also have used terrain clearance or TC mode. The display needs a bit of interpretation. Essentially, we're using it here to confirm that we're headed towards the right initial point, having made the turn where we thought we needed to. Well, how do we know? Well, if you look at the radar display as a top-down picture of the terrain, or at least the ridge lines on the terrain, you can actually see that we effectively see the harbor. We see the bottom brighter line is the near headlands, and the top line is the back ridge behind the harbor. So we know that the plan calls for us to pop up over the headland right at the end, and the radar shows us that we are on course to hit that point. So now that we're headed in the right direction, the next thing to talk about on this mission is the weapon that we're going to use, which is the AGM-45 Shrike. It's a missile that homes on radar emissions, so it's used to take out SAM radars. It works a little bit like a Sidewinder. When you arm it, it emits a tone. When that tone changes, it means that it has detected and locked onto a radar that is within its seeker arc. And when you hear that tone, you can launch. But the seeker zone is quite small, so you actually have to know where to aim it, and the range is quite a bit shorter than the range of an SA-2 missile. And the Shrike works better when it's launched from altitude, so it can loft and come down on the target, which means that we need to plan our approach carefully, because we need to stay low while we're outside of the Shrike's range. Then we have to pop up when we are in range, quickly find the target, lock on it, and launch on it, and then be prepared to evade a missile if we are launched on while it is on its way to the target. We have the additional issue that the SAM site is actually not very easy to see. True, it's in the middle of an open field, but the individual vehicles are small and hard to see from the range at which we're going to be launching the Shrike. So that's where the finger comes in. By studying the air photo, we can identify it as a feature that points to the SAM site. So the plan is that as we pop up, we pick it up, and then we follow it up to the SAM site. We put our nose on the SAM site, and we hopefully get a tracking tone from the Shrike. And as you can see in the mission, it worked pretty well. After that, the only new item in this mission is using rockets, but since we have a whole mission number 7, that's about a rocket attack, I think I'll leave the discussion for next time. So next up is the Alpha Strike mission. There's really not much new here in terms of weapons or systems. Again, it's a dive bombing attack. but this time we're able to actually come in at altitude. There isn't any need to pop up. Now, it does show off the problem, at least one of the problems that I have in doing a dive bombing attack, and that is trying to figure out when to roll in. I do it by lining up the target on some feature in the cockpit, in this case sort of that corner notch on the left-hand side. I think it was a better bombing run than the first mission, although I am off a little bit to the left. In terms of mission planning, we see that we're using two groups of aircraft this time. We've got the flak busters and the strike package, and there is a little bit of traffic management going on to make sure they stay out of each other's way. What we do is we send the flak busters in at mid-level and straight at the target quickly, and the strike package actually goes around to the right and flies a bit more slowly and then comes across, but by the time they arrive over the target, the flak busters are actually gone. In fact, a lot of what's new in the Alpha Strike mission is stuff that's going on kind of under the hood. It was the first mission where we had a significant number of other aircraft flying, and trying to get all of those AI wingmen to fly the missions that I wanted them to was a little bit of an exciting exercise. But that's kind of a topic for another day. If you guys are interested in knowing more about how these missions come together in the mission editor and in post-production, let me know and I can make a separate video about that. So that brings us to Mission 6, Snake Eyes at Sunset. I have to tell you that this is one of my favorite missions, partly because the flying is really fun, and partly because of the lighting. I mean, streaking out of the dark at 500 feet and 500 knots to wreak mayhem on the unsuspecting, what can be better than that? Once again, here we use the Nav Computer in this mission. We actually fly to the waypoint for some time this time. Here, though, the Nav Computer is more of an extra aid to help us pick exactly the right ingress point in the relative darkness of the valley. It also helps to count down the range so we know when we're getting close and we can get our master arm on and those sorts of things. In the end, I didn't really try to fly right to the waypoint. I just waited for the needle to start to flip, and then I knew that I was at just the right point to pop up over the side of the valley. The other aid that we use in flying down the valley is the radar operating in profile mode. To set it up, you just need to set the rotary dial to terrain clearance and set the radar mode switch in the front of the cockpit to profile. By the way, you might also want to turn down the warning volume on the left-hand panel, otherwise it can get really annoying. Now, once again, this display needs a bit of interpretation. You have to visualize it as the aircraft flying from the left-hand side. The fat line is the terrain in front of the airplane, with the range increasing to the right. The single thin line is your predicted flight path based on currently how you're flying. Because the vertical scale is not uniform across the screen, it looks kind of weird. This is because the radar is projecting its fan-shaped beam on a rectangular screen. Anyway, the point being that if the flight path line goes below the terrain line, you are headed for a problem at some point. How soon you will have that problem, and therefore how long you have to correct it, depends on how close to the left side that intersection happens. For instance, you will notice that if you dive, even a little bit, you will notice that the display immediately alerts you to the fact that you are going to have a problem soon. Likewise, if you are flying level over the valley floor, but are pointed at the valley side below the crest, the display will show you that you're okay for now, but that eventually you're going to have an issue. As with the Nav Computer, the radar is more of an aid here. You could fly the mission without it, and you definitely want to have eyes outside the cockpit, but I found that with a bit of practice, it actually does help. As far as weapons employment, there's nothing much new here. Notice that the ripple is set quite long so that we can spread the bombs well along the runway. One thing to note is that I decided not to depress the sight this time, and that was because with the amount of kind of fancy flying that was required, I decided I wanted the pipper on the horizon. So this time I just decided to drop based on the bottom of the sight scale, which is about 160 mils down, so it's not a bad mark for a low drop with the Snake Eye. As I did with the other low-level missions, I left the AWS set to 500 feet and used that altitude warning tone to tell me when I was basically at the drop altitude, so I didn't have to watch the altimeter. As with the other low-level missions, the challenge is getting lined up on the target while flying low and fast. In this mission, we came over the ridge a bit past the target so that we can actually come over the ridge low and still have time to pick up the target and align on it. As before, as I was coming down the ridge, I mentally drew a line along the runway and extended it out until it hit something, in this case the stand of trees by the edge of the water. And then I used that as my marker so that as I turned, I wanted to end up coming over them and being aimed at the runway. In the end, I was a little bit left and I had to nudge back a bit to the right, but it worked out okay. Other than that, I just should have waited longer to drop the bombs, I realized, so they were more in the middle of the runway. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Skyhawk Tips and Tricks. If you see anything else in the videos that you think needs to be explained, please let me know in the comments. If you're enjoying the videos, please like and subscribe. For now, this is Sidekick, signing off.